Welcome back to the Discovery 2 LS Swap series. In this video, this LS is going into that Discovery. But first, this is my only chance to give the engine bay a good clean. So I'm going to roll it outside and power wash it. I have to button up a few things with the engine before we get into it. I have not installed my dipstick tube yet. That goes in here. And into that hole. Just got to find the right orientation. Make sure you have your O-ring here. You can lube it with a little bit of oil. I had to use both hands to get it fully seated, but now it's there. And up here, one M10 bolt. If you have an LM4 aluminum block, it's possible that you don't have a hole for the dipstick here. I only know this because there's a Lost Cause Ranch video where we had to drill his own hole for the oil dipstick. I will link it down below. I also wanted to add these heat shields to my spark plug wires. I'm pulling the oil pressure sensor off of the Rover engine. That's a 24mm socket. And I was gonna put it here, but my stupid lift is in the way, so maybe I'll just loosely thread it in just so I don't forget it. I will fully install it after the lift is off and it's in the engine. Now I'm going after the coolant temperature sensor on the, what is that, lower intake plenum of the Rover V8. 23mm wrench on that. There's that. If you have a 99 to 02 vehicle, your coolant temperature sensor might look different. It might have a cylindrical plug. Passenger side head, you might have a plug. Take that plug off. I applied a bit of thread sealant since there seems to be some before. I'm putting the Rover coolant temperature sensor right there. In the engine bay, there's a couple things I want to get done. For one, the power steering cooler in this vehicle is pretty rusty, so I'm going to replace it. I'm going to replace it with a genuine kit because I found that the aftermarket ones don't fit properly. Another thing, while I have all this clearance, I'm going to take out the Rover oxygen sensors and put in the LS ones. I'm only using 2 oxygen sensors. So for the back 2, the downstream oxygen sensors, I'm leaving the Rover ones in there as plugs. But you can definitely plug them up with something like this. If you're doing O2 sensors, get yourself one of these. That didn't come. That came out pretty easy. Oh, that was lucky. Oh, dang it. Now I have to get out. Wait, I have a magnet. Now, GM ones. These should thread right in, yeah? GM or Land Rover oxygen sensors. Same thing, right? These should just fit, right? Oh, look, comes with some anti-seize. That's good. Yeah, the thread's right in. There's probably a torque spec for these, but I don't know what it is right now. I like it when people read my instructions, so maybe I should read other people's instructions. 35 foot-pounds. That's the torque. If I put a jack under the transmission to lift it a little bit, this would be easier right now. So glad I got this magnet here. Gonna have to get in there with a ratchet. Right now I'm gonna put a jack under the transmission to lift it a bit so it's not pointing down so much. Okay, while we're in the engine bay, one last thing to do. First of all, make sure the torque converter is fully seated in there. So, if the torque converter fell out or came off, when you put it in, it needs to do 3 clicks. It needs to be about 1 inch shy of the surface of the bell housing. You should not be able to slide your fingers behind it. So, make sure it's fully seated. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take some of that copper anti-seize and we're going to apply a little bit of copper anti-seize to the torque converter snouts. That's it for the engine bay. I'm out of here. So I'm finished with the engine bay. It's ready to take the new engine. There's just a couple of things that are going to be open questions. When the engine goes in, I don't know if those transmission cooler lines are going to fit around the engine properly or if they're going to be in the way. And I have a suspicion that this exhaust flange is a little too high and is going to collide with our exhaust manifold, and I'm going to have to cut off the flange. But I won't cut it off yet because I just want to see where things line up. That one down there might be okay. This one is taller. So on the engine, you see the back of the engine is facing the crane. We actually need to flip it, so I'm going to drop the engine to the ground, flip the crane around, and pick it back up. I never got a chance to torque that crank bolt 140 degrees, so I'm going to have someone hold a bolt or something back there. Or actually, I'm going to have someone put a pry bar in the pulley while I torque that bolt. Okay. Now's a good time to torque that oil pressure sensor to the back of the car. Couple last minute to-dos. I'm going to put a bit of anti-seize in the crank adapter bore right here. All right, as I gently lower the engine, I make sure that nothing's getting snagged or in the way. We are still a certain distance away from the transmission here, and I'm paying attention to those transmission cooler lines that kick inward. They're going to have to sneak behind the adapter plates. I'm also checking the exhaust manifolds and the Y pipe. There's plenty of room on the driver's side. On the passenger side, they are already touching there, so I definitely think I'm going to have to lift the engine back up a little, cut that exhaust flange, maybe down to here where that weld is. Sawzall, metal blade, angle grinder works too, whatever you've got. This makes less of a mess though. 2 minutes later, it's done. Engine's back in, more or less level with the transmission. I'm making sure nothing's getting snagged. Make sure nothing's getting pinched back here. Yep, everything looks happy on the passenger side as well. At this point, I like to go under the car, try to line up the engine and transmission. I can use a jack to lift or lower the transmission and try to line up those dowel pins. I go under the vehicle, first thing I see, yeah, the engine needs to come up, transmission needs to come down, engine needs to go this way. Yeah, so I just gave the engine lift a couple of cranks. Now it's more or less level with the transmission. It just needs to come off to the side. Oh, there we go. So you see our transmission cooler lines just slid under there. Our only issue is that the oil filter is going to be in the way. So we're pretty much lined up here. I don't think the dowel pins are in, but like you can see that we're lined up pretty good. Transmission cooler lines would be fine, except for the section around the the oil filter, which is a bummer. Okay, I pulled the engine back out because I want to solve the transmission lines issue. What I did in my first swap is I used some of these, which are half-inch hardline compression fittings adapted to -8AN. And I think that's what we're going to use again, because this was the most leak-free option that I found. So we're going to cut the lines cleanly here with a grinding wheel and transition to our own custom -AN lines. And then you have several options. You could rejoin back to the hard lines using another set of compression fittings, or just keep going. I think that's what I would do. Just keep going with the AN line until you reach the cooler. And here you could just use some barbed fittings into the rubber section of the hose, or just buy a new transmission cooler with AN fittings already on it and just hook up directly to that. So with that, the first thing I have to do is cut the rubber hoses so I can see what kind of inner diameter we're working with and see what kind of hose barb I need. Of course, cutting those lines is going to drain some transmission fluid, so I put a catch pan under there. So I cut that one, and I measured the inner diameter is exactly a 1/2 inch, so I need to find 1/2 inch hose barb to AN adapters. So here are the parts that I got. I got 10 feet of -8AN steel braided line. These are 4 terminations for the hose. These 2 barbed fittings will go into the transmission cooler and convert to -8AN. And these 2 are 1/2 inch compression fittings that will convert to -8AN. This will go on our aluminum hardline. I will add all these parts to the Excel spreadsheet. I've cut both rubber hoses now, so that means we can actually get the transmission cooler out of the way, which will be nice. Don't want to use an angle grinder or some kind of grinding wheel because it creates sparks, and that line is full of oil, so I don't want to start a fire, right? You could probably also use plumbing tools like the ones for cutting copper pipe and take care of it that way. Right, so I went and got my plumbing tools. Got this adjustable pipe cutter that can go down to 1/8, so that'll be up to the task. And a deburring tool to clean the edge of the pipe after the cut is done. So first I'm going to remove these clamps that are holding the 2 pipes together so I can make a little bit of space between them. I'm going to sneak the cutter over here, right by the transmission. Really doesn't matter where you make the cut, it just has to be before this elbow. There, so. Oh. Ah! Now it's all oily and it's gonna slip from my fingers. That's how that works. You just spin, tighten it some more, give it another couple spins, tighten some more, etc. Tightening, tightening. Oh, here we go. I feel the pipe yield. I think we're done. I think I did it. Yep. Okay, we've cut the pipe, but now we gotta clean up the cut. I'm gonna use the deburring tool. That's just to clean up any burrs that could be on the edge of the pipe. Just run it on the inside. Our compression fitting is going to seal on the exterior of the pipe. So you have to make sure that the pipe on the outside is nice and clean and smooth. So use some emery cloth or Scotch-Brite or sandpaper or whatever and get the pipe really clean on the outside. I'm gonna install the compression fittings now because I figure it's gonna be easier than doing it with the engine in the way. So you take the compression fitting apart and there will be a brass ferrule. That's the thing that's gonna compress. It's important not to not forget what you need to do first is slide this onto the pipe, then the ferrule, and then this. So like I said, first this. I might have a bit of a burr on my pipe here. I think I have a bit of an edge on my pipe. I'm gonna have to grind that down or deburr it. Ideally, I would have an outer reamer tool to ream the outer edge of that pipe, and I don't have one, so I might try to do my best with some sandpaper. Okay, I cut the pipe back a little bit more, and I got this in, and I even got the brass ferrule in there. This was pretty tight. Almost had to kind of hammer it in. Maybe if I cleaned up more of the pipe, it would have gone in easier. But this should be good enough, and I'm gonna get the other half of the fitting in. Maybe I'll do this pipe first, actually, so it's not in the way. Also, so I can show you. So this part goes in first. So it finally went in after I reamed the outside of the pipe a little more. Now the ferrule goes right on. Perfect. And now the other side of the fitting goes on and threads in. And we're going to tighten them together with a 22mm wrench and the 22mm socket. I'm going to hold this side with a wrench, and I'm going to put a socket on this side and tighten until it's tight. Quick correction, I didn't install that compression fitting correctly. You're supposed to bottom out the second half of the fitting before you start threading it in.
Then put on the compression sleeve, and then the fitting. Make sure the fitting bottoms out. There's a step machined inside the fitting. Make sure it bottoms out against the line, and then hand tighten the socket, and then tighten it about one turn or until it gets snug. And that's all there is to it.
Okay, now I'm going to take the pre-cut ends of my 10 feet of tube, and I'm going to add those terminals to it. Hopefully the ends that come pre-cut are nicely clean cut. Yeah, no, unfortunately the pre-cut ends were very frayed, so there is a sort of snipping tool that would be ideal for cutting this. But I don't have that tool, so I'm going to use a cutting wheel, which should hopefully do a good enough job. Nope, that did a terrible job, actually. So don't do it that way. I heard that if you put a hose clamp and then cut right up against it, that you'll get some pretty good results. So I'm gonna give that a try. That actually made a very clean cut. I may have clamped it a little too tight, so it kind of flared out, but let's see if it works. So I took apart the end fitting, and we just want this piece. It has some threads in it, so it's gonna sort of thread on as you push. I'll admit this stuff is not easy to work with, but I finally got a clean enough cut that I could get this on. I hear that maybe with some proper cable cutters, there's some cutters that just have pincers that go like this. that can make a clean cut. But I don't have them, and I need to get this video going, so this is what I did. Now you need to put a little bit of lube inside of the pipe before this next step. It's almost too much probably, but a little bit of lube to help this not go in dry. So you put the other end in and start tightening. Yes, a 24 millimeter wrench combination. And we'll do that until it bottoms out fully. Fully bottomed out. That is not going anywhere. Now I took the two finished ends of my AN line and connected it to the transmission lines, and I've effectively created a loop, right? And I'm going to leave it like this and put the engine in. And my idea is I'm going to just cut and finish the lines after the engine's already in, so I can decide exactly how I want to route the lines. And having this loop will prevent any leaks. So trying to do everything I can before the engine goes in. I think I'm going to do one last thing. I've put some heat shield on the lines because I know they're going to be close to the exhaust. Transmission fluid can be a fire hazard if it leaks on your exhaust, so I take this pretty seriously, and I think the lines are gonna kick away like this, maybe even go near the shock tower, just as far away from the exhaust as possible. Just kind of route this way. Now we're ready to put the engine in for real. Okay, quick thing before the engine really goes in, I want to do a test fit of the engine mounts. On this side, the U-bracket fits perfectly well, doesn't get caught on the weld. But in some vehicles, this is my second test vehicle, didn't happen to my first one. On some vehicles, the engine mount U-bracket can get caught a little bit on the weld that's there. Right, and so it won't fully seat because of that weld. You could grind the edge of this mount, but maybe the easiest way is to grind the slot here open a little bit more. Right, just grind the slot here just a few millimeters until you see that this seats properly. It's possible that you will get a future version of these mounts with a slightly narrower base, and this won't be an issue. And we're back where we were before the transmission line saga. I did route the new lines on the other side of the steering column, so that way I can route it away from the exhaust as possible. I'm grabbing 2 bell housing bolts, and we're going to go under the vehicle and try to get the bell housing to mate with the engine. So under the vehicle, I got the engine and transmission sort of level with each other, and I put 2 bell housing bolts in with the yellow washer because these are the ones that are going towards the oil pan, and I don't want them to bottom out on the oil pan. Remember, I didn't carve out a clearance on the oil pan, so I recommend using 2 yellow washers on these down here. So I put them in and didn't tighten them fully. This is just for me to help me keep my alignment down here. And I think right now there's a gap between the transmission and engine up top. So if I lower the transmission and engine both together, I should be able to get the dowel pins to seat. Right? That's my idea. In fact, with those 2 bottom bolts in, I'm not worried about the transmission falling out, so I can remove the jack and save me a ton of room, and I can move the engine and transmission together and just wiggle them until they fit properly. Up top, I feel like there's a very tiny, like 2 millimeter gap between the bell housing and the engine adapter plate. So that means our dowels are probably already in the right position. If they're not, just wiggle the engine a little bit. It's not strongly recommended to use the bolts to force the dowels in, so I'm trying to avoid doing that. But the dowels can be a tight fit, depends on your vehicle. On my first swap, the Rover dowel pins went into the Rover bell housing super easy. And on this one, I did a test with the engine out of the vehicle, and the dowel pins were tight individually. They're pretty tight in the hole, so it just kind of depends on the tolerances, and there are always a little bit of differences between vehicles. So this one's a little bit tight, so it's normal if it takes some effort to get in. But I think I'm pretty much there or really close. So now with that jack out of the way, I can lower the transmission and engine together and gain access to the top bell housing bolts. And I'll have a better view of the dowel pins, and I can use the top 2 bolts to cinch the transmission onto the engine finally. Whoa! But anyway, I got enough room here, and I can see that the bell housing and transmission adapter are only like 1 or 2 millimeters apart from each other right now, which if the dowel pins weren't in, we'd have a much bigger gap. So that means dowel pins are starting to go into their positions, and all I have to do now is put 2 bolts on top, tighten them, and we have cinched the engine and transmission together at that point. A little pro tip: if you loosen the transmission mount nuts a little bit, you'll be able to move the engine side to side a little more and maybe avoid this collision here. You're gonna have to do that anyway when it's time to get the engine mounts in. So I might go down and do that. Yeah, so I did that, and see, now I can definitely push the engine out of the way. All that extra room, I can get to the top 2 bolts with a ratcheting wrench or socket, or even my hands, whatever works. I just put in that 1 bolt. The stubby wrench was super helpful, and it went in super easy, and I can see that the engine and transmission are cinched together. So now it's just a matter of going around and putting all 9 bell housing bolts in. So on the driver's side, I just got that bolt and 1 down there, and there's 1 further down that honestly would be easier to get from the bottom if the exhaust Y pipe was out of the way. But I've been very stubborn, and I've left the Y pipe in so far, so I'm going to keep being stubborn and just work around it. On the driver's side, where there's no starter, there are 4 bolts, the 1 near the top, and then 3 more going down, with maybe the bottom 2 are easier to reach from below. But on the passenger side, where there is a starter, there's only 3 bolts that go in. The 1 near the top, and then 2 more going down. That's 4 on this side, 3 on that side, and 2 at the bottom, for a total of 9 bolts. You can always look at a picture of the adapter plate to refresh your memory. On the starter side, we've got 1, 2, and 3. On the non-starter side, we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4, plus the 2 at the bottom. So try to focus for you, but I did get 3 bolts on this side. 1, see if I can zoom in a bit. 1, 2, and 3, and I think I'll get the 4th one from below. Same on the passenger side, I got the 1 bolt there. There's a 2nd one around there, and the 3rd one I just started threading in, and I left it a little loose so you can see where it is. It's a little bit hidden. It's near where the LS dowel pin is. So I was able to get to it with my right hand. I think what I'll do is I'll lift the engine up a little and push it that way to make more room to get to that last bolt on this side. It's possible that one's a little easier to reach from the bottom too, with an extension or something. So I got all 9 bolts in, and I'm going to show you a little bit of what I had to do. So I got the top 2 tightened from up above. The 3rd one I started from here, but I tightened it from below. On the driver's side, I got the top 3 in and tightened from the top. Now the engine has been lifted, so I could do the rest from the bottom. So from the bottom, I used a little stubby with an extension and a wobble and the 15 at the end. And that's how I got to this bolt over here, like that. So that's the 4th one on the driver's side. And then the super hidden one on the passenger side, the super hidden one that's just like above here. I also got to it with the extension. I had started it from above, but I finished tightening it with the extension from below. There are no bell housing bolts that go here. Yes, previously when it was the Rover engine, there was 1 or 2 that went here, but because the starter's in the way, we don't use these anymore. So, and then just the last 2 in the bottom, which I snugged up at the end. So You're supposed to torque these bell housing bolts to 35 foot-pounds. Obviously, it's difficult to get a torque wrench to all of these bolts, so for those of you who can't get a torque wrench, do your best. Tighten by hand. Remember that if you ever have to take this apart again, you have to take it apart by hand with your little stubby wrench. So don't go too crazy with the torque. But that's the torque spec, 35 foot-pounds, so you know. All right, having the engine in and bolted in is a pretty big milestone. But there's one more thing we need to do. We need to get those bolts that go from the flex plates to the torque converter. So grab those 4 little bolts from your kit and put a little bit of blue thread lock on each of them. And I'm going to leave them here to dry a little bit so it's not dripping everywhere. To get to those torque converter bolts, we have to remove the oil pan. So the hell? That was needlessly difficult. So this is our view with the oil pan removed. There's our flex plates. There's our starter. So we have one of the appropriate holes of our flex plate is here. That's convenient. And using I open the porthole here, and using the porthole I can gently spin the torque converter until I see a bolt hole line up. Let me get my lights. Nope, there's one, I think. Now looking through the porthole, I see that was not in fact a bolt hole. That was just a big old hole. By the way, side note, you should notice. Okay, there's our bolt hole. There's a captive nut. So you should notice there is a gap between the flex plate and the torque converter. That is normal. You should have a gap that is 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch, because when we bolt down the torque converter, we want to pull it away from the transmission a little bit by 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch, so that it's not bottoming out into the transmission, which could cause pump damage. This is how it's supposed to be done. So with my captive nut lined up, I go ahead and put the first bolts in. Socket. The torque spec for these is 44 to 46 foot-pounds. So after you got one in, turn the engine 90 degrees and put the next one in, and there should be 4 in total. Now spin the engine about a quarter turn. Right there. And there's our next hole. So repeat that for all 4 bolts and torque them, and you're done. I got all my torque converter bolts torqued to spec, and I closed that little porthole back up. Now there's only one thing left to do, which is to put the oil pan back. Okay, let's work on this oil pan. I'm gonna just clean up the oily surface and do one thing that I forgot to do earlier, which is to put this block off plate here. This came with the oil pan, so. And another thing I didn't want to forget, the oil filter adapter also comes included. Tighten that with a 24mm. Now I'm placing the gasket on it and prepping it with a couple of bolts, so that will just help keep everything together. Now under the car, cleaning up the gasket surface, make sure it's not too oily. Right. Get rid of any of that RTV that's left over from the previous install. So there is RTV on all 4 corners where the front cover and the back cover meet the block. You can use a plastic scraper if you need to, but in my case it just rubs off easily. Okay, now for that application of RTV, it is indicated to put a 5mm bead, 5mm wide that is, 20mm long, just like that, in the areas where the front cover and the back cover. Now the back cover, same story, just along that seam. Like that. Bam. Just like that. All right, now the challenge here is to have careful control of the oil pan. I'm going to lift it up into place and try not to smudge. I'm going to lift this oil pan into place and try not to smudge the RTV all over the place, right? So my strategy is to have a drill ready, lift the oil pan. Well, maybe the drill is not going to work. I'm going to have to use my fingers. Lift the oil pan directly into position without too much wiggling. Let's see if we can get this pickup tube. Okay, finally got through. So I'm getting my oil pan directly into place, as directly as possible. Trying to get one bolt to thread. Holding the oil pan with one hand, grabbing my drill with the other, trying to get one bolt. Okay, not all the way tight, just enough to hold the oil pan in place. Just enough. I'm not sure. Okay. Whew. So the oil pan is held in place with two bolts. They are not tight. Now we begin the installation and torque sequence. Okay, installation sequence starts pretty straightforward. You want to install all of the all of the oil pan bolts without fully tightening them. Just install by hand or with careful control of a drill, including the long ones that go in the back. Two long ones that go here. So all the bolts should be in, but not fully tightened. So here we go. Okay, all of my oil pan bolts are in. Now I need to put in the bolts that go, the two remaining ones from the adapter plate to the oil pan. And if you see, oh, they don't quite line up, then give the oil pan a little side tap. You might have to make sure your bolts are loose enough for this. Give it a little side tap until it does line up. Just one thing. Let's say you're trying to tap the oil pan this way and you're trying to line it up with the holes on the adapter and the holes just don't line up. Well, there's a reason for that. And if you're using an aftermarket pan from Amazon and certain windage trays, there's a bit of interference that happens sometimes. So I don't know if all oil pans are affected and all windage trays, but let me show you how to solve it. So the reason you're not able to tap the oil pan is because of this edge here. The oil pan is hitting this edge, so you have to take your windage tray out, which is just 4 nuts, and then you can slide it under the pickup tube. You don't have to fully remove the pickup tube. So take your windage tray out and then use that carbide burr die grinder and grind this edge down. Put a little more clearance. Then your pan will be able to shift left and right, and you'll be able to line up with the bolt holes on the transmission adapter plates. If that's not enough, maybe you have to bend this in a little bit. Right, just take some a fat pair of pliers and bend that in more. But I don't think that's necessary. I think all you need is this. If you're still having issues, just contact me and I can walk you through some troubleshooting steps. Okay, now I've put in those two adapter to oil pan bolts. And I've definitely not tightened them very much because we need to torque the oil pan down first. All right. Now for torquing, we're going to torque to 18 foot-pounds from the middle out. So we'll start with the two middle ones and then go out in a circle basically until we get all the bolts. So middle, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit there, and so on. And then the two long skinny bolts that are by the bell housing, those are torqued to 106 inch-pounds, which is a bit less. And finally, torque the bolts that go from the transmission adapter to the oil pan Those are 35 foot-pounds, I believe. It's going into aluminum thread, so I don't want to go too crazy there. I might just call it at 30. Well, I think I'm going to leave it at that. I know it's a little weird to leave this with the engine still hanging and no engine mounts, but I want the engine mounts to have their own separate video, and this video is getting kind of long. So, that'll do it for this video. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.